I'm very happy to be able to welcome you 80 plus participants to this webinar, the first of its kind, where we combine outcome mapping learning community and the outcome harvesting community to talk about lessons learned and share some experiences from combining outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. You can imagine we're very excited about this first event. My name is Connie Hoytink, and I'm one of the facilitators of the outcome harvesting community, and I facilitate that together with Carmen Wilson-Grau and Goele Scheers, whom you will see and listen to a bit later in this webinar. Simon, go ahead.
Yep, hi everyone, good to see you as well. I'm Simon Hearn. I'm the coordinator of the outcome mapping learning community, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the OMLC. We are a global community for everyone interested in outcome mapping. We've been around since about 2006, all online, but we do meet up occasionally. And for those who are not members, please do drop on by and visit us at outcomemapping.ca and do join. We are really pleased to be running this webinar with the outcome harvesting community. This has been a collaboration that's been we've been working towards for some time. You may have seen that we published a paper together a few weeks ago. That paper was the work of several months of collaboration between the two groups. And this is really the first time that we've come together to talk about how these two approaches, which share a lot of commonalities and have come out of the same kind of community of thinking. But it's the first time we've really looked at how are they being used together? How are these methods combined? So we're really pleased, and this is going to be probably the first of many of these kinds of conversations. We've already been seeing these conversations in both of the respective mailing lists, so I'm sure it will continue. We also thank you for your input so far. We did ask ahead of the webinar for you to review the paper, to see if you had any questions or particular areas that you wanted to learn more about. And so we took that on board and we've used that in preparing for today. We may not be able to answer all your questions. There's quite a lot there. But we're thinking of some clever ways of feeding those back to you and turning them into continuing conversations. Connie, why don't you take us through today's event?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Simon. Yeah, realizing I could have said a lot more about the outcome harvesting community, but actually maybe it's better just to see us live and visit websites and sign up to next webinars. For the agenda of today, we have foreseen 4 presentations of about 10 minutes each. First, Goele and Richard are going to talk to the paper that they wrote and that is available on both our websites, outcome mapping and outcome harvesting, the common concepts, their differences and uses. And then we'll have 3 people speaking to the experiences that they have had in combining outcome harvesting and outcome mapping in one way or the other. We will make sure that we have sufficient time. We plan some 20 minutes for questions and answers, but also after that, we will join some breakout groups, small breakout groups of 4 people. And as much as possible, as presenters and facilitators of the communities, we will divide ourselves among the groups so that you have some chance for some more in-depth discussion. And of course, we're always available for more questions online if you like us to. Yeah, before giving the floor to the first presenters, I would really like everybody who participated in the organization of this webinar to thank you for your efforts and inputs and making presentations and standing the chance of doing so. Well, yes, some logistical notes, I think, from Simon before I will invite Richard and Gule, and then as we go along, I will introduce the other presenters to you. Simon, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Connie. So just as usual, please keep yourself muted while you're not talking. If we do hear any noise, we will probably mute you ourselves. We also ask you to keep your videos off during the presentations. This is just to make sure we keep the bandwidth for the presenters. But when we do the Q&A, please, by all means, turn your video on and engage. We have the chat. You should be well versed in using chat. If you're not, then you'll see on the Zoom toolbar, there's a button that says chat. Please use that for any questions, and you can post your questions at any time. We have a couple of people dedicated to monitoring those questions, and they will be taking those and sort of sorting them and preparing them for the presenters to respond to. So all questions will get looked at. We can't guarantee that they will get answered. However, we will, as I mentioned earlier, we will find a way of circulating those questions through both of the mailing lists so that the conversations can continue. Great. And this is the result from the Menti that you've just been doing for us. Thank you so much. This just gives us a sense of who is in the room with us. So we have slightly more outcome harvesters than outcome mappers, but quite a few, more than I think we're aware, who have used outcome mapping and outcome harvesting together. So you lot, the 17, we're looking at you. We want to learn.
Just to note, Simon, there are a few people who haven't used either, so welcome. We hope this webinar will be informative for you as well.
Perfect. So handing back to Connie.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Simon. I think it's time now to give the floor to Richard Smith and Gule Scheers. They're both independent consultants. Gule is a steward of the outcome mapping learning community, as well as one of the facilitators of the outcome harvesting community. And Richard is a steward of the outcome mapping learning community. And they both have ample experiences with both outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. So that makes them the excellent people to kick this off. And I don't know whether I already mentioned that these are the authors of the document that we sent to you in preparation of this webinar. So go ahead. My challenge is to keep the time of the 10 minutes. So I'll disturb you a little bit when you've got 2 minutes left, but the floor is yours. Enjoy it.
Thank you, Connie, very much, and a very warm welcome, everyone. I'm Richard Smith. I'm an independent consultant. I'm based in the UK. And Connie, you were very generously saying that the paper, outcome mapping and outcome harvesting, commonalities and differences, was authored by us, but it was a collective effort. I think it's important to note, of the stewards of the outcome mapping learning community and you facilitators of the outcome harvesting community. So just like to put that out there. I'm just so excited to be here. I have the names, so many friends and people I've worked with over the years, and hopefully new friends. As Simon said, we want to hear from you during this and after, as the conversation continues. Why did we as communities put this paper together? Well, we often get questions thrown at us in trainings and discussions. Outcome mapping, outcome harvesting. Some people are totally familiar with one, not in the other. Not that many people are familiar with both. So there's often confusion. And then over the years, as outcome mapping seemed to have been created longer and longer ago, originally, outcome harvesting seemed like the new thing, and therefore, is outcome mapping even relevant anymore? And it is. It's as relevant today as outcome harvesting is. And when they kind of outcome harvesting evolved from outcome mapping, and Gule is going to tell us something about that origins now.
Yes, great. Thanks, Richard. So, hi, my name is Julis Geers. And let me bring you back to the very beginning of the two approaches to start off. And so just to remember you, so outcome mapping was the first of the two approaches that was developed by Terry Smutilo, Sarah Earle, and Fred Carden. And outcome harvesting was developed by Ricardo Wilson-Grau and a number of colleagues such as myself. And outcome harvesting has built upon the concepts of outcome mapping to develop the monitoring and evaluation further. But actually, the early applications of outcome harvesting were under the banner of outcome mapping until the approach started using its own name around 2011. Ricardo Wilson-Grau has also been chair of the OMLC, but then moved on to create the outcome harvesting community to focus specifically on outcome harvesting.
Great. We're going to, in a spirit of collaboration, try and share this presentation back and forth. So let's hope it goes well. I am putting a few slides up there to help ground everybody in a few of the key messages from this paper that we circulated. So what do they have in common, outcome mapping and outcome harvesting? You can see the list there. So what does that mean? I mean, they're both approaches which foster evaluative thinking, critical thinking, and have a particular way of thinking about change. Firstly, they're actor-centered. So rather than focusing on what you do or this kind of ultimate impact level changes in the world or in societies, it's those who can you influence and who's going to change is going to mean that there is a lasting effect of what you do. In this case, in this illustration, let's use a mini case study here of a women's group.
Yes, and the next thing they have in common is the way they define outcomes. So an outcome, both in outcome mapping and outcome harvesting, is defined as an observable change in behavior. And this observable change in behavior is broadly defined as a change in practice, relationships, policies, or activities of those actors that you're trying to influence. So in this case, for example, with the women groups, it could be the fact that they actually claim their rights in their workplaces. So that could be a change there.
Okay, the third common area between the two approaches is contribution, the contribution of the intervention of the program. So both assume that outcomes materialize as a result of what multiple different actors do. So in this example here, which is about empowerment of women, this contribution could be that the project brought together this women's group shown in the picture with other women or other women's groups who had claimed their rights, and there was learning and confidence building and sharing between them.
Yeah, and both approaches are informed by utilization-focused evaluation as developed by Michael Quinn-Patton. So basically, that's really defining upfront who your users are and in what way they will use the information coming from the monitoring or evaluation. So outcome harvesting makes that as a requirement, actually, that all the decisions that are taken throughout the harvest are based upon the users and muses.
Okay, so that's the common foundation. What about the differences? So we're taking you through now the differences as described in the paper. So the first one is purpose. So if you look on the left, the 12 steps of outcome mapping, this familiar figure to anyone who's opened the manual, you see it covers the intentional design, planning what you're going to do, setting out how you're going to and use the tools for monitoring what you're going to do, and then the evaluation stage. So outcome mapping covers all three stages.
Outcome harvesting, on the other hand, has 6 steps, but these 6 steps, they are related to monitoring and evaluation, but outcome harvesting does not cover design or planning.
So the next difference, don't worry if you can't read all this, but the key thing here is, it's related to the first point. In outcome mapping, you develop a framework against which to assess, discuss, reflect on progress or not and what you're doing. So you describe outcome challenges, a kind of ideal way in which you want actors to behave, and you describe progress markers with steps on that journey of influencing an actor, and they provide a framework for reflection as you go forwards.
And in outcome harvesting, on the other hand, as said, it's not a planning or design approach. So in that sense, you don't start from a framework to collect your outcomes, but for assessing your progress, you can basically take any kind of planning document to compare the harvested outcomes with a planning document. Or you can use no framework at all and really see from your outcomes what is emerging and where you're heading towards. So basically, it can be used with an intentional design of outcome mapping, but also with other kinds of framework.
Okay, so the third point is requirements for recording outcomes. So in outcome mapping, you have a template for a journal, and of course you can adapt this, but it does say what you should have in that journal. So it says that you should describe the change, the contributing factors and actors, sources of evidence, unanticipated changes that you've seen in that actor, and space for reflecting on lessons or changes in what you might do going forwards. And in outcome harvesting, there's a modified approach.
Yes, so in outcome harvesting, actually goes a bit further with the requirements on how to formulate the outcomes that you harvest. So there's a specific way of formulating the outcome statements, as we call them, with the different elements. So you need to define an outcome description, significance, and contribution description. And to do so, there are smart criteria and guidance for that.
You have some 2 minutes left.
Thank you, Connie. Very good.
So in outcome mapping, basically you focus on the boundary partners, and those are the ones that you are influencing directly. Whereas in outcome harvesting, you also look at the indirect outcomes, and Richard will give you an example of that.
Yes, so as you can see on the screen, let's see this example here. So imagine a project has trained a civil society organization, let's call them Cleaner World, in social accountability, and mentored them so that they could potentially use it for the first time. So they're the boundary partner, or in outcome harvesting language, social actor of that project. So let's imagine that they've actually put that into practice, this new knowledge, outside of the project, beyond, after the project ended. They've applied these social accountability concepts for the first time to generate evidence to put before a court. So that would be an outcome, the direct outcome. Then the indirect outcome in this example would be that evidence was part of the reason why a court fined a company for environmental damages, using the evidence in part from that civil society organization.
Great, yeah. So we showed you the commonalities and the differences of the two approaches, but we also have quite some experience in combining the two. Just to give you an example, what I often have done is to, with bigger organizations involving different partners or with networks, is to define the outcome challenges as a way to really make sure that they all know what they're striving towards, but then actually use outcome harvesting to really track progress on where you're going to more in detail. So without defining actually the progress markers.
And well, time is up. Okay, I'm going to squeeze 5 seconds maybe. You could also maybe start, and as I've done, and I've seen others do, start with an outcome harvesting evaluation, and that thinking, that way, which is so often new, of thinking about what is change and what is the change that matters, focusing on actors and behavior changes, you can then bring into your design, planning, and thinking about your future work.
Thank you very much. Admire your time keeping, and I'm happy I allowed you the last few seconds, Richard. It was very valuable to start with evaluation and then go into planning. Great. That brings us to the next presenter, and that's Julius Nyangaga. He's the CEO of Right Track Africa and also an advisor to the OMLC community. Julius will talk about, will share his reflections on proposals, how outcome mapping concepts can boost the significance factor in outcome harvesting. I love the specificity of this title alone. So I'm very curious. Julius, I'm going to disturb you also. Apologies for that, but that's my role today. Floor is yours. Go ahead. You're muted, Julius. You're muted, Julius. You're still muted, Julius.
Yeah, so sorry, I was trying to get the unmute button. Okay, thanks a lot for that introduction, and thanks for the background to Matthew and Hula. My presentation is actually a follow-up on what has just come before, because there is a very strong relationship between the two processes, which can actually have been used without, sometimes unintentionally, to boost the significance factor in outcome mapping. And the significance factor is quite important in evaluation. What I'll do is just take you through a couple of slides. Unfortunately, it's just for text, but it explains what I have in mind for whoever wants to either implement outcome mapping or even to evaluate using outcome harvesting. And this has come from various sources, but I'll explain that later. Let's first of all understand when the outcome harvesters present a statement or an outcome statement, or they collect information, there is a parameter they call significance. The full out statement is the change in significance of the project contribution. And this is quite self-explanatory. The thing is, the significance is the quality of something being worthy, the outcome statement being worthy. Now, the interesting aspect of this parameter is that actually it's a value judgment of the outcome. It is, what does the outcome really mean? And the basis on it can be very subjective. It really depends on who is asking, who is responding, and what they value. So unless they're guided, you may get and we get a lot of very rich observations of significance, but it really varies and sometimes it may not be used. And in many cases, actually, I observed it was not used. So my data sources were a review of what exactly was meant by significance in outcome harvesting, how it has been used, and any recommendations of how outcome mapping can use its support in effective data collection analysis for evaluation. We have the outcome mapping guides by Terry Smodilo, Fred Carden, and Sarah Au. But what was most valuable was outcome harvesting reports that are publicly available, just downloaded from the various sites. Many of them were shared through the outcome harvesting forums, and or presented during the discussions. And I've been downloading them for the last 1 year and a half, and just reading through them a little. But there was a very significant discussion on the construction and the content of outcome harvesting statements that took place in 2019 between May and October. And I went through that to see how can this be used. So, like I said earlier on, the outcome significance can be based actually on the basis of what I observed. Harvesters allocated their own judgment. And that was based on the basis of how they understood the outcome harvesting assignment and the outcome harvesting process. Because this was informed, of course, during the TOR or the inception process. But also project staff really in what the outcome mattered based on the goals of the activities of the project, what they intended to achieve. Now, then there was processes through which, during data collection, external parties, especially respondents in communities and other factors and other actors like governments or other institutions, were asked to indicate how significant an outcome was, but that was tended to be how that change has affected them or how it intends to affect them. And in a couple of cases, it's the donor who somehow indicated what the outcome harvesting was to do based on the investment policies and justification of the outcome forum. So in a couple of cases, there was no significance even mentioned at all, and no criteria or description of given beforehand. So sometimes it was not even used. People just collected information on outcomes and their contributions and wrote out the report. So what I noticed about the outcome statement because this means that the method is kind of flexible and that allows for some kind of adjustment to suit an outcome harvesting process. And the first adjustment I noticed was the placement of the three parameters. Originally, there's outcome, significance, and contribution, because the significance is given before linking the change to the project input. Now, this is quite classic because in outcome harvesting, the driving principle is contribution of the project rather than attribution. So significance comes in second. Let's first of all try to find out what the outcome was and what was its significance before we consider the contribution. But then in quite a number of cases, and during that outcome harvesting chart in 2019, this came out that actually the outcome statement or the outcome description should be outcome and project contribution, and the two of them then provide the significance. So this was an observation that was made by quite a number of contributors. In the paper that I'm about to write, I give them initials. I'll later on find out whether I can get permission to quote them. So the significance comes later. Now, when you look at those cases, it means when you look, you can use outcome mapping concepts because it's more forward-looking design of a project to give a rationale for significance, analysis, and recommendation. And I read through all those outcome harvests, and summaries and contributions, and I observed one thing: the recommendations and everything, because it is the significance that determined what was being concluded and going forward. And I noticed the basis of significance was either utilization focused evaluation, which was the first basis of using outcome harvesting, and you had that presentation from Matthew and Hula. Project objectives and theory of change, which is the most common, or categorization of the outcome into emerging themes and progress markers, magnitude and intensity of change, project contribution to the transformation was also a basis for significance, and of course, where outcome harvesting was now incorporated into the standard evaluation process of OECD. Now, of all of these ones, the details are quite a lot in the paper. I just picked out for this presentation, these four, and showed how that has happened. Now, when on the basis of the project objectives and theory of change, the questions that were being posed during data collection or analysis was the extent to which the outcome shows progressions towards the project vision, which means the vision was a basis for the significance. And questions were being posed: where are we with the expected outcomes? To what extent are we achieving what we expected? What has been achieved and what has not? And what constraints that we are targeting? So if you have that as a basis, that can help you then do your data collection, and analysis to present a very effective way. So the outcome mapping vision is a basis, and to an extent, therefore, the boundary partner outcome challenges, which have been explained earlier on. There was, again, quite a number of papers that categorized outcomes based on certain themes. One most significant one very popular one was who is changing and how. So describe the outcome and try and, first of all, present or rather do a summary based on who is changing. Is it an individual? Is it a community, is an institution? Is it researchers? Is it development partners? Is it policymakers? And again, because these are, but the selection of boundary partners with which a project interacts with.
2 minutes, Julius.
Yeah. 3 minutes? Okay, I'm just about to see it. Then levels of change, that was also there. So this also influenced the significance level. Then there was this basis, which again is also related to progress markers, is magnitude and intensity of depth of change. So how widespread was change to the larger population, or how entrenched into community or cultural, natural culture and policies? How transformative was the change beyond? This was a basis again used by some of the reports to categorize and characterize outcome harvesting outcomes, again informing what has happened and what can be done better. And this was the other final one, project contribution transformation. If you consider one case, classic case was the work by Cornelia and I think that was Matthew Smith. classifying the CCAPS program, where they come down from 100 outcome leads to 14 outsmarts. But if you read through the paper, one strong guide was the observed change, regardless of not regardless of how big or deep it was, to CCAPS. CCAPS is the climate change agriculture think tank or research think tank. How closely was those changes linked to what CCAPS produced in form of information or tools or research? Okay. So this was a very classic example where outcomes that were harvested were now again analyzed on the basis of how they were connected. And in outcome mapping, we have the strategy matrix, where the project explores ways of supporting various boundary partners, and some are effective and some are not. And that choice of strategy, the activities and outputs in strategy matrix can be used as a basis of when we collect outcomes, what data do we collect? How do we analyze? When we bring it on board, how do we analyze what has been effective and what has been not compared to other external parameters? So as a conclusion, I would say whoever is intending to carry out outcome harvesting, from the basis of what I observed, significance is important, but agree on the parameters early on. And then that information can be collected during primary data collection, when you're talking to respondents or key informants, or even focus group discussions, or during data analysis and sense making. The paper is still under development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julius. This was very interesting. Methodological. I'm sure I'm going to re-watch this. I'm definitely sure. Thanks a lot. This brings us to our next presenter, which is Florence Etta. And Florence is the CEO and the principal partner of GRADE International Development Evaluation Consulting. And she's also the vice co-chair of Eval SDGs. And Florence is going to share with us an experience, her practical experience of combining outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. I'm very curious. Florence, are you there? I cannot see Florence yet. The floor is yours. Is Florence
unmuting and starting my video?
Okay, good.
And then going to the presentation. I'm going to share my slide. Just hold on a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're welcome. Don't worry. This is very fast.
Okay. So, yeah.
I can see your screen.
Great. Can everybody see my screen now?
I think so, yes.
Great, fabulous. Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. So we're sharing. It's a good thing that Julius and both earlier speakers have talked about where we've come from, and Julius gave us a more theoretical bite into this. What we're doing here is sharing a practical experience from a 2020 midterm program review. The midterm review is of a program called Transforming Agricultural Universities to Meaningfully Contribute. I'm not sure how familiar you are with RU Forum. RU Forum is Regional Universities Forum based in Uganda, Kampala. But it started out as a collaboration among 10 universities to improve agricultural training in universities. And now it has gone to 129 plus universities. And TagDev, for short, is one of their 4 programs, and it's supported by MasterCard Foundation. It is an 8-year program, and this was a midterm review. The details of that are on the slide. The most important thing is that the scope of the review was for 2 universities, 2 of the primary universities in Gulu. University of Gulu and Egerton University in Kenya. So the review was done started in March. It was supposed to be 6 months, but it ended because of the coronavirus. It ended, just stretched out until the end of the year. So Why did we think of adding outcome mapping and outcome harvesting? Because of the problems of the coronavirus situation, we needed to think innovatively. So we had to add OM and OH to some of the traditional methods. And we also wanted to quantify the data. Some of the chat comments are asking whether that is possible. Yes, we did that in this example in order to support analysis and especially to enable visualization so that many more people can use the findings. You've heard the saying that a picture is more than 1,000 words. So that was the essence. Plus, Roof Forum in itself wanted us to consider other ways of presenting the data. So from the very get-go, we thought, how would we do this? So what did we do? Already said that we combined OM with other methods. Specifically, we did what we call a rapid outcome and harvesting task and harvested outcomes from key informant interviews. So for the rapid outcome mapping and harvesting, which we call ROMA, it was a virtual workshop. And we had 13 people. These were all staff of the program initiative in both Gulu and Ergeton. So these are people who are very familiar with the program. And we took them in the workshop setting through the first 5 steps of the intentional design stage. And at the end of that time period, we had developed the outcomes, they had identified outcomes, and had stacked them up as progress markers. So the product of that virtual workshop setting was the development of progress markers. Those were identified. On the other hand, we had done earlier, the rapid outcome mapping and harvesting workshop was almost the last data collection exercise we did. But the key informant interviews came earlier on in the process. And these ones, the 14 we identified and used, were implementers in the universities. So the program is working in universities with university staff and university faculties and departments, as well as students. Students are the ones that they give scholarships to. So students, staff, in the hope that farmers, because they train the students in situ in farms. So these 14 key informants were the ones that were located in the universities. And what we had done with them was have interview guide and transcripts, and extracted from the transcripts all outcomes that were close enough to the identified outcomes that the program staff had stated. Plus, we had also done a lot of what we call document analysis, a systematic document analysis to identify what outcomes were expected. So what we were doing here was using outcome mapping and outcome harvesting in the evaluation of the program. What happened here was the progress markers. If you're familiar with outcome mapping, we converted the progress markers, we quantified them, and expect to see as 1, like to see as 2, and love to see as 3, basically in the thinking, the outcome mapping thinking that talks about the intensity of change or transformation. There is a sample of the outcomes that came out of the ROMA exercise. The ROMA is a virtual workshop where we had a rapid training on outcome mapping and did the first to 5 stages. So here were the specific suggestions. And these were statements from the staff themselves about what they wanted what they had seen at that point in time of the program. So we are here midway in the program and various projects in the program, and they were telling us what they had seen. So here, a boundary partner is the university itself. What are the expectations and what are the outcomes? This graph here shows you, and this is really the point of the quantification. The quantification was basically at the ordinal level to tell us because of the quantification, we could generate this graph. And basically what this graph shows is the black line, the line on the top line there, if you can see my cursor, black line at the top is for the universities, and the line at the bottom, where is my cursor? The blue line is for the staff. So what we found was for this particular 13 groups of people, they stated 6 outcomes that they expect to see, 5 at the like to see level, and 1 at the love to see level. So these were
2 minutes.
Great, thank you very much. Okay.
Actually, a bit less already.
Okay. So this is the same story, just showing you this in a different form. So you can see the expect to see the slide, the graph. This is outcomes for students and farmers. Again, these outcomes are stated by university staff and program staff for students and farmers, not the farmers themselves stating that. So you see the difference in the slide, in the graph. These are inverted V's as opposed to what we saw earlier. And that's interesting. So what did we find? What are the lessons? Quick lessons is that combination is possible, even with traditional methods. And in a sense, from where we stand, is perhaps desirable. It can enhance and reinforce findings, make them visible. However, the Roma respondents must be carefully selected because they have to be familiar with the program. And that when Roma outcomes are stated for other boundary partners, they could present a problem like you saw in the inverted V graph. That KIIs, key informant interviews, need to ask the right kinds of questions that from which outcomes can be harvested, and they also need to be carefully transcribed because they form the basis for outcome identification. And document analysis prior to doing all of this harvesting is key. That's all I can share. The website is for RU Forum, and if you want to get more information about RU Forum and what they do and TagDev, you can go there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Super, Florence. Thank you very much. And sorry to have to cut you short. I know there's something more that you could share. Let's hope that will be possible either in the Q&A or in the small breakout rooms later. Very interesting. And it seems so logical the way you combined it once you get the presentation. On to the last presenter of today, and that is Maya Rega, a monitoring, evaluation and learning specialist. I can actually just say that I'm very curious to hear, Maya, from you, how you combined the two approaches. We're all yours. Go ahead with your 10 minutes again.
Thank you very much, Connie, and thank you everyone for listening. And I will start by saying that I was actually invited to speak here. I'm sure others were as well, but I was invited because I got a bit passionate about the combination of OM and OH in a discussion that we had online, and about the practical elements of it. What I said in that discussion was, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a project manager, I'm definitely not a purist. I'm an internal evaluator who is supporting my organization and teams to understand what they do, what they achieve, and what difference they make to the people, communities, and environments they work. And I think for me, both outcome mapping and outcome harvesting are now a part of my toolbox, and I love using them. They're very, very helpful for me. Let me share my screen. I've got captions on as well, so hopefully it will be helpful for some people. I think it's important to just say a few words about me and like my practice, because this is what led me to outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. I'm an immigrant in many countries. I'm originally from the Middle East, from Jerusalem, but I've got European heritage and I live in Europe at the minute. The different approaches and different way of thinking, I think, are really important. My practice is to support practitioners to enhance the organizational impact, to look at improve and improve what they're doing. I usually almost always work as an internal evaluator, so it might be quite different to a lot of you who are external evaluators and consultants. I work within the organization. I usually build frameworks that are have to be used for monitoring as well as evaluation, for the learning, for everything together. And I usually work in organizations that are close to the ground. So either grassroots organizations, very small ones, or at the minute I work with London Youth, which is a membership organization working with youth clubs in London. So it's all quite close and practical and kind of very, very light on resource, let's say it like that. The situation I want to talk about, the case study, it was with an organization called Stop the Traffic, which I worked with for a few years. It's an organization that working to prevent trafficking, human trafficking around the world, quite in a systemic way. But the organization didn't have any experience at all in monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So funders never asked that from them. They just asked for reports. They didn't know what outcomes were. It was a very kind of different environment. Working, as I said, around prevention, which is quite difficult, as you all know, to kind of evaluate, and looking at systemic change with a lot of different types of stakeholders, influencing really a huge amount of different kinds of people and organizations with different strands of work, and all done by quite a small team. And when I first got to the organization, my task was to build a framework. That's why they hired me for a monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework. And nothing I knew before made sense. So I went to do some research and looked at OM and OH. And I think the key thing that drew me into both of these was around their focus on use and the utilization focused that was mentioned before. They're all about what are we going to do with these findings? How are they going to help us? How are people that are actually practitioners and sometimes beneficiaries or project participants can use them? They were also talking about the different stakeholders and focusing on the stakeholders, putting them, the boundary partners of OM, in the center of everything, which made a lot of sense with the organization I was working with. They talked about outcomes for both people and for organizations, and the way that behavior was mentioned, so changes in behavior that you can put to organizations as well, made a lot of sense. And also this kind of discussion about contribution rather than attribution, especially thinking of an organization that is doing a lot of work with different organizations, different people that they're trying to influence others. Contribution really made a lot of sense. And a few other things, especially from the OM, was the holistic approach, because the progress markers are so good at showing all the multifaceted way that we can think about outcomes. And because the organization didn't really know anything about monitoring and evaluation before, they didn't really have outcomes in their minds that much. It was really hard to kind of help them think about outcomes. So the idea of unknown outcomes of coming from outcome harvesting really kind of made a lot of sense there. So what did we do? We started to build the framework. We didn't have time, like in a perfect ideal world, I will probably do a big outcome harvesting project to kind of really find what the outcomes are, and then set a framework on top of them, but that wasn't possible. So we started by basically explaining the concepts of monitoring, evaluation, and learning via the kind of outcome mapping thinking. Especially helpful was thinking about the difference between who and what we're influencing directly and what was beyond that. So a lot of the things that the organization was thinking of was really kind of very visionary type impacts that was a bit too far, so making it a bit more realistic. We developed the framework together with the different teams, then brought it all together. So working on who are the boundary partners for each of the different teams, looking at the specific outcome challenges for them and the progress markers, and then bringing it together for an organizational framework, because a lot of the boundary partners actually were the same ones. We looked at a little bit at attitudes and perceptions as well, not just change in behavior. So we looked at changing knowledge, changing the way people may behave in the future. We tried to kind of make it work for us, and I'm not sure Ricardo would have, loved it, but it worked for us, so that was okay. The key thing was to kind of try and think, how will the change manifest itself, and try to kind of prove that and evidence that. Another thing we did was look at, we also used some additional outputs that don't work completely together with the progress markers for specific campaigns, for example, but they can feed into them later.
2 minutes, Maya.
Thank you.
Yeah.
With the monitoring, so how do we collect data and record it as we go along? We used outcome journal, we used outcome notes. So Safer World have a really good version of kind of collecting outcome harvesting type data, and some additional data collection tools as well that are now put into, everything is now stored in one database and recorded on one database. And for the external evaluation, so basically the evaluation that we've done at just a random place in time when it was right for the organization, we used both, obviously, all the data collected through the journals, but also the kind of giving quantitative value to all the progress markers. That worked really well with one team, which was more corporate, worked with businesses, and it was more corporate focused. It didn't work for the other ones. But also we did the outcome validation, all that kind of, all these outcome harvesting steps with the outcome notes that we found. So basically the outcomes that were harvested or gathered by the team themselves. So to summarize, just I think a few reflections of why it worked and what went well. I think it made people understand much better what is it that we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, why is monitoring, evaluation, and learning important, and how it can help them. Because both outcome mapping and outcome harvesting is quite intuitive, actually. Putting to the side all the a lot of details and steps, the ideas behind them. It was very flexible and holistic. It enabled us to see the different elements of change, especially when it was quite difficult to guess them before, to assume them beforehand. And the combination was really good. I think possibly Richard mentioned it at the beginning. So it kind of helped us identify the outcomes, but also then go back and put them in a theory of change and update it.
Thank you very much, Maya.
It was quite an interesting experience.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Super, Maya. What a wealth. Thank you very much. Again, some food for thought, and so happy that this is all being recorded for all the presentations. I'd like to thank all the presenters really, and hand over now to Kaya and Carmen, who had the job of keeping an eye on the chat and guide us through that. Go ahead, Kaya and Carmen.
Thank you.
Connie, and thank you to all the presenters and the great participation in the chat. We have been taking notes of your questions and seeing some discussions emerge. So we're going to go to the first question. That's from Tirno Diouf from UNFPA Ethiopia. This is for Hula and Richard. He asks, what can be the strengths and challenges or weaknesses combining OM and OH?
Richard, do you want to go ahead?
Okay, I can start. I think the strengths are that if you really want to have that active focus, that behavior change focus in what you're not only setting out to do, but in monitoring, reflecting on what's actually being achieved. Some challenges can be that you can be too heavy with either of the approaches. You have to judge how much of the outcome mapping intentional design steps to use, whether it's sufficient to, sometimes it's sufficient to identify boundary partners, and that provides enough direction to an initiative. When they've already got a results framework, they don't need another. Other times you go much further, all the way to strategy maps. And outcome harvesting, if you're using it first and foremost for monitoring, how many of the credibility measures in outcome harvesting do you need to use for your monthly reflection, for example? So you need to take judgments, and that can be challenging to make. Hula, anything?
Yeah, maybe
more?
just to add to that, yeah, just one thing maybe to add is to a strength is also really to use this thinking on outcomes just fairly early on. So already in the development of your program, to think about that, which of course makes it easier also if you go to the monitoring and use outcome harvesting, that people already have that mindset.
Thank you, Hula. Over to you, Kaya.
Thanks, Carmen. And just a shout out to Mariam as well, who's been keeping an eye on the chat. I might just flash it up quickly on my screen before I go to Julius and ask him a question. This is, we've been capturing everything on the chat, and as well as the questions that came in before the webinar, and we're collecting them, and we'll also make this available as a PDF to share around on the communities as well, in case you're interested in these excellent reflective questions. So Julius, it's not really a question, it's more of a reflection, but I wanted you to build on it a little bit. This is something that Taris Sarai reflected on, the aspect of project teams really articulating the significance and the significant statements, and the value of having that really in-depth process in outcome harvesting to reflect on what significance means, and reflecting on what the harvester has picked up on. And how that and how the significance responds to that. So just wondering if you could say a few more words about the participation of project teams in boosting that significance statement.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, this again is based on reading through the methodologies that were explained, and also the way Ricardo has tried to guide on how he discovered about. But what I observe is this. Significance is supposed to be one of the data you collect as part of your outcome statement. So some of the questions that are going to be asked is, this was the change, this was the contribution, so what was the significance? The thing is, if you many times it's just an open question, and people will just give their own judgment. That is during the data collection. During, say, for example, an informant interview. Why was this change important? And you just take down the notes, and what they give actually is very valuable. The only problem is, and the reason why in some of the cases I noticed probably it was not observed, I would really, really request if the authors of these papers are in this forum, they allow us to access the database. The thing is that maybe the depth and the variation of the significance statements was so big, it couldn't really make sense. So that's why we say if you bring in outcome mapping, somehow it guides on what you ask. The other aspect of it, as is mentioned later on, is during a group discussion, you can have a consensus. It's easier then as a participatory exercise to have a discussion. What exactly do we mean by this outcome significance? And then again, during the discussion, you can guide to what is meant by that, and then use the information and the views that are coming across to do that. During data analysis, normally because it's done most of the time by the harvester then gives their own judgment, and they use what was the objective of the evaluation, or what was the use of the evaluation, and they fit in the outcomes into the various aspects. Now, for the project team, therefore, what I think I've observed from taking part in a lot of participatory exercises, is how to manage the thinking, how to manage the collective views to come into what exactly you're looking for when you need significance. And it takes a lot of expertise in guiding. First of all, most of us project managers, because of our we are very abstract thinkers, there's been capacity development. It doesn't go about to what outcome harvesting and outcome mapping do without showing what exactly do you mean by who and changing how. So getting people to think into an outcome structure about the change actor changing how because of what you've done can take a bit of thinking and guiding and really coaching and getting people to think through that. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Julius. Back to you, Carmen.
Thank you, Kaya. So we had a very lively discussion in the chat, which came from a question from Kyla Boisvart. This is for Florence. So Kyla says, I'd love to hear more about the level of complexity of the problems that the presenters faced when using OM and the OH together. She has tried to use a combination of OM, OH that Florence did, but they had to switch to entirely OH because we realized we were facing a much higher level of complexity than was conductive to OM. We used the early OM steps for a beefed up OH design, then are beginning to collect outcomes over time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that question. The things we did, I guess, in some ways was, would you like me to start my video? No, it's okay. What do you think?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Florence.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, it says I can't stop my video because it's been stopped. That's fine. Start my video, okay. Thank you. All right, so we did have the major complexities we had were in relation to the program itself had a number of projects. So this was at the program level. But what we did was identify make sure that we were talking to the program staff themselves who understood the program very well. And what we asked of them before we even did the virtual workshop, we had done extensive document analysis, which was fairly structured and systematic. So we knew exactly they had a good theory of change and a logic model. So we could identify, they had a mission stated clearly. And at the workshop, the virtual workshop, what we did was basically try to affirm, using OM language, those first 5 stages. And so in a sense, what we tried very hard to do, it was difficult. It was very difficult for them to in a sense, when we were trying to, for the project staff to understand the boundary partners and even the implementers at the university level, they were mixing up a lot of the issues about social actors, the downstream social actors in the language of harvesting with OM. So we had great difficulty trying to In a sense, they were very excited about it, but complexity stopped coming in. All we tried to do was try to keep it as simple as we could to reach what we wanted them to reach. They were very good at identifying what results had come. Both sets of groups are very good, but it was difficult to try and, in a sense, focus on the key things, the outcomes that required, because they were going all over the place. Complexity is a reality, and that's the whole point about this, about outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. Complexity is a reality. What was useful for us, because we were in evaluation, we came here with specific evaluation or review questions. So we concentrated on those review questions, trying to find out who in this whole tableau of actors would be able to answer. And as you see, if you ask the program staff and the implementers, their understanding or their recounting of outcomes that are farmer-based and student-based were not as good as their own recounting of their own outcomes. So that showed that there was some tension, some tensions there. And because of the period, we couldn't really reach students, as many students or farmers as we could. Those were the smallest numbers of people we could use to hear them tell us about their own outcomes. So yes, complexity is real, and we're trying to make it as clean as possible, but we had difficulty. I'm sorry, I should have probably talked about the difficulty more. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you so much, Florence. I hope it does, otherwise the chat is still open to follow up. Over to you, Kaya.
Thanks, great reflections, Florence. Thanks so much. And Maya, a question for you. This is in part inspired by a question from Michelle. Hi, Michelle. Nice to see that you're with us. And I know it's not in Michelle's exact words, as I said, it's inspired by her question around the flexibility of outcome mapping. So you have an M&E system where you're using something that is seen by some as not as flexible, outcome mapping, as outcome harvesting is, and you've got a nuanced kind of pre-planning of progress markers, and then at the same time you have the outcome harvesting approach with a vision towards unexpected change and flexibility in that sense. So how do you manage those tensions of something that is for planning and something that is a little bit more flexible, that's a bit more retrospective? Is there flexibility for you in the outcome mapping approach that kind of meshes with the flexibility of the outcome harvesting approach?
I think it's a really good question for anything evaluation, really, because it really depends on your approach. And I think this is why I wanted to talk about myself first, actually, and where I'm coming from, because I think your flexibility is in your approach. And there might be people who would say that I did it all wrong, that I did the outcome mapping wrong and that I did the outcome harvesting wrong because I meshed them or because I didn't, or the specific elements that I decided to use, you can't just do that, you need to use everything. My approach is different. My approach is, this is another element in my toolbox. These are the things that I still see the value in them, even if they're not, even if you don't do the whole 12 steps of the outcome mapping, even if you don't do the whole 9 steps of the outcome harvesting. That's kind of one side of it, of the flexibility. The other side around, and just to say actually to that, I felt that the outcome mapping was very flexible actually. The way it's presented to people, which is kind of, look, we're a community, learn from the different things that people are doing, gave me the impression that it's quite flexible. But the other kind of side of the question of the kind of retrospective versus planning, I think they really complement each other. You need both of them. It's really easy to kind of not see unintended outcomes when they come. But if you start with thinking, actually, I'm sure I'm not going to find all the outcomes when I'm planning. Let's give that a space. Let's give that room and use intentionally outcome harvesting for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Maya. Over to you again. Carmen, just a note, Carmen, I don't know if you saw Simon's note in the chat. So perhaps a few more questions.
Yes, thank you, Kaya. I did. I think we have time for one more round of questions, and then we'll go to our breakout rooms. So this is again for Hula and Richard. During your presentation, you showed us the differences between OM and OH. So there's a question about why outcome journal and outcome harvesting stand alone, and what is the possibility of aligning them together?
Okay, I can start with that. So I'm guessing it's that in the presentation we showed the outcome journal and then the template on outcome harvesting. So indeed, there can also be a combination of the two. So sometimes the requirements for formulating outcome statements in outcome harvesting are used also to report outcomes in the outcome journal. So that is a way of combining them. So to have the more the specificity that outcome harvesting offers in the outcome journals as well.
Thank you. Richard?
Yes, nothing to add. I think that's, yeah, you can be creative in how you combine, indeed.
Okay,
and Julius, this may not pertain only to doesn't pertain only to you, or perhaps not specifically to your paper, but I'd still like to get your take on it. Some questions around qualitative versus quantitative aspects of outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. Susan asks, are both outcome mapping and outcome harvesting purely qualitative? And then in the chat, there was some discussion that they can be transformed into quantitative. So any thoughts on that, Julius?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Initially, there was the thinking that because we're talking about actor transformation, there was the thinking that it is outcomes in outcome harvesting is just about actor transformation. So it's purely qualitative. That's what the initial thinking was. But as we've gone on to implement both methods, there has been a kind of interest or need to get something more tangible on what you mean by a transformation. And therefore, both processes have somehow, in many project teams I've worked with, built in some quantitative aspects of the transformation. So if you say, for example, we are looking for the extent to which, say if you talk about a gender-based violence, the extent to which families are able to live peacefully. You know, this is a cultural practice, and you can probably ask, go talk to, people in charge of culture and the community to find out what is happening at down community level. But then projects will say, is it possible for us to do some kind of quantitative analysis through a quantitative survey to understand that? So in outcome mapping, what is happening, as much as we have the progress markers mapped out to show levels of transformation, project teams are building an interest to put in, can you quantify that? What does that look like in the population of interest? How many chiefs are we talking about? Or how many provinces? So it's possible, and even during that analysis, even outcome harvesting, yes, we collect the data, but that significance level is, how significant is this transformation? Can you put a number on it? And people ask that, and we build that into the data collection. So yes, that is going into that.
Thanks, Julius.
Okay, I have a question for Florence. This was one of the questions we received before the webinar. Florence, based on your experience combining OH and OM, could you share some practical steps of smoothly combining both methods?
Thank you very much for the question, Carmen. First, I want to say that it's not easy. Just to be clear about that. So what we did was agree that we want to use. I come from an outcome mapping background. I have gotten some training in outcome harvesting by Ricardo himself, but I'm more adept at outcome mapping. What I like with the outcome harvesting thing was the quantification, the counting of outcomes, and being able to, even at the ordinal level, manipulate them based on that. But I also love qualitative dimension in the beauty of describing change. So what we did was identify, use the intentional stage, because the program was not built using outcome mapping. So we basically took the program team, the team that wrote the program proposal, and took them through the first 5 stages of outcome mapping to reaffirm the mission and vision, which they had in their project documentation. We just did that. But the most important part of it, where they really had difficulty, was trying to make them concentrate on the boundary partners. And that is important because you cannot then identify changes if you don't identify the boundary partners. So that was a difficult part. And they started adding people like things like banks. And then I'm like, so how do you want to change the banks? Are you working with them directly? Are you giving them money? Is the bank not doing what it normally does? So they had great difficulty trying to identify and separate boundary partners from non-boundary partners. So that is a critical first step. Make sure that you can agree with them. And once they did that, they also had difficulty trying to understand how the university is a boundary partner for the program, because the program has an office in the University Department of Agric. So that understanding, that it was a bit like a tussle. No, Florence, we don't agree. When I said, okay, let's. So identifying boundary partners and then identifying progress markers and stacking up the progress markers, those were the difficult things. But once we agreed on that, it was easy for them because they were talking from a position of knowledge. They were very familiar with the program, and they identified at that point in time, this is 4 years down the line, what results are you finding? And what also helped us was that we had done interviews with them, so they were familiar with what we were looking for and the questions we were asking. So those 2 things were the most serious things to identify. After then, the rest of the work, most of the work, was now for us, the harvesters, the evaluators. The difficulty was also not finding enough farmers. There were 4 sets of boundary partners: the universities, the staff, the implementers, or project people, and then the students and farmers. Students and farmers was difficult because of the time and because of COVID, but we did get a few. So I hope that helps.
Great. Thank you so much, Florence. Over to you, Kaya.
And Maya, one last question to wrap up. Maybe if you could think of one caution, someone in the chat said they're in a kind of similar position as you. So people looking to set up an internal evaluative system, one caution that you might suggest in terms of combining OM and OH, what would be your advice? I'm sure there's
a hard question.
Big one.
I think it's about being really clear what you use for what, and kind of what does it mean, the different elements of each of the kind of slightly different ideas that you bring together. So I guess I would say that the first and foremost is for you to explain yourself and to plan yourself and really be clear about, okay, what am I going to do? What are exactly the elements? Why? Justify for yourself, why are you using them? How are they going to help you with that specific element? And then going out to other people with them, they will ask a lot of these kind of questions, especially again, that organization, they really didn't, the whole concept was completely alien. So there was a lot of explanation to do of things that, you know, were completely intuitive to me and I didn't needed to think about explaining.
Thanks, Maya. Looking at the utilization focused again from all aspects, very important. Thank you to all of our presenters. I'll let Connie and Simon give further thanks and wrap up.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you so much to Florence, to Maya, to Julius, to Richard and to Hula for speaking with us today and sharing your expertise. We just want to say a couple of words about the next events. So I'm going to just talk about the next outcome mapping webinar, and then Connie will talk about the next outcome harvesting webinar. So I'll put in chat just a link to where you can find the details of the next webinar. Sorry, that link didn't work, so I'll post it again. So the next webinar is called The Advantages and Challenges of Adopting Outcome Mapping from the Perspectives of a Funder and a Program Manager. So we get very practical. We will be hearing from someone from a funding agency and someone who's managing a program using outcome mapping. So do join us. We are varying our time zones for these webinars, and this webinar is hosted by our co-chair who's based in New Zealand, and it will suit those of you in the Asia time zones. So it's going to be very early in the morning for Europe, about 8 a.m. In Europe, and about midday for India. So that's the kind of time zone we're going for next time. Do look out on the outcome mapping website for future webinars. We will be posting a series going through the end of this year. Connie.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Well, yeah, just to say and to add that the outcome harvesting community will have its next webinar on the 10th of June, a little bit more than 2 weeks from now, and that will be about outcome harvesting for monitoring. 20 strategic partnerships, all with some link to Dutch development organizations. They used outcome harvesting for monitoring purposes over the past 5 years. And a survey and some research has been done on that collective experience. A report is available, and we will share experiences on that. And there is also a report already available. I'll share the link to this same invitation and the report in the chat in a minute. But welcome to see you in that next webinar. Thank you.
And the last thing for me to say is thank you to all of you for joining. Thank you to Kaya for organising the event and keeping us all organised with the agendas and etc. And Mariam for your work on the questions, and Connie and Carmen for your hosting. Great, so we're going to close the event now and stop the recording, and we look forward to seeing you next time.